Hey, everybody, welcome to the J3U podcast. I'm your host, John Jewett, with me, co-host Luke Miller. And today we're going to touch on what are the high-risk models that you've run for PEDs. And this is going to be specific just for pros. So what have we seen that's been just outrageous that pros have done? And I ask these off of my Instagram just to people to DM me what they've been given. And this isn't necessarily cycles that they actually end up running because some of them were pretty outrageous, but these are still like from reasonably well-known coaches that's been given out. And it's something that to see like just what's out there. And that's the point of this, is not to just, throw anyone under the bus or, but to just make awareness of what is out there and what are ways that we can mitigate risk and alter cycle design, and what does the real high risk model look like once you've reached to the higher end of your potential. And that doesn't mean you necessarily need to be a pro, because you're going to have a pro that is genetically phenomenal and probably has never even had to touch the highest level of PEDs, that someone that maybe doesn't have all the genetics put together that might. So you might have someone on the same PED model with far less development, while someone that has like far more development will have far less PEDs. So it's purely off of a needs basis. But this is to say, like, what does that look like, that cycle, once you're reaching there, and when is probably the real cutoff for when you should make the call of pursuing this out?
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit of education too around, what are the limits of certain compounds within these high risk models too, right? Because we talk about places that we're willing to run compounds within, just like the generalities, especially within like the PED module of J3U. But like we need to understand that some of the higher risk models may have different limits, or they may not. And like, where are those limits and what does that look like? And are any of these acceptable in any nature? And if not, why? So that you guys can make some more educated decisions on your usage or kind of weed through bad information that you may have come across in the past.
Yeah, I think it's with like one of our last episodes talking about deaths in bodybuilding and looking at that. And this kind of like feeds into that of, if this is like a lot of, I know this is given out as even people's like first, if you come to this coach, this is given out like to everyone. And if that's your plan for the next, 6 years of bodybuilding, it is highly likely damage will be done. And it wasn't even close to necessary to do that, or even optimal, because you're left 6 years later, probably not being able to bodybuild anymore. And there's absolute cases of this where guys ruin their health and cut their career short. And not just for competing, but it's all really being in your prime to make a business out of bodybuilding. So it's still like, we've always talked about the stepwise approach, but for that decision of the bodybuilder where you're reaching now to these dosages when it's time, it's the call you have to make, right? You have to make these calls, Luke, of should you keep going? Because if this is what your cycle looks like and your second call out nationals, you've been doing this for a while, you're now inching along in progress, what happens when you actually maybe turn pro or get in the first call out? And is that an endeavor worth continuing?
Yeah. Well, if you want to dive into the first one, we certainly can, and just kind of start to, break it down, kind of walk through what may have been different, or just like some of the illogical decision makings with this first one that we have.
Yeah, and I think this is cool to see, just some, because these aren't even my clients, they're just people I know off Instagram. But we have a men's physique pro, 2 classic physique pros, and a open bodybuilder pro. So across divisions, and what's going to be interesting to see is that there is no like, oh, the open guy is going to be taking more than the men's physique guy. It's like you'll probably be surprised in this. Where do you want to start, man? You want to start men's
physique?
Let's
start men's physique and work our way up.
Cool. So cycle layout, and sorry guys, if you're just listening, hopefully y'all can follow along because this will be a rattle off of a few compounds, but this is per week dosaging, 1,000 milligrams of test-propionate, 1,000 milligrams of Tren Ace, 1,000 milligrams of Masteron propionate, 700 milligrams of Primobolan. Every day was 50 milligrams of Anavar, 50 milligrams of Winstrol, 80 micrograms of clenbuterol, 40 micrograms of halotestin. And that was run for 5 weeks. It wasn't stated whether it was, obviously I'm presuming it's contest prep for what's in place. Don't know what phase of contest prep, but if it's beyond 5 weeks out, it's probably not getting any lighter, I would imagine. Yeah. But I mean, we're looking at, this is probably close to 5,000 milligrams of total anabolic load, easily. Yeah. I didn't math out the everyday dosages for the orals, but
I didn't either. Let's see, that would be,
it'd be 1,000 milligrams a week of orals.
Yeah. So you're looking at 4,700 total?
4,700 mgs.
Yeah. Jesus. So I think the first thing is like looking at the test dose, not only the test dose, but the ester that's associated with it. There is old adage that we should be switching from cypionates and ethates to these faster esters within the test propionate within these contest preps, right? It's like the classic, like at 6 weeks out, you switch from cypionate to an ethate. And in my opinion, like just on the ester comment, if you have coached someone long enough to understand where their test limits are without an AI, typically you will have enough notification or notice to be able to modulate that down as you go across the contest prep as needed to modulate the look. Now, for a lot of people, for a lot of people that you're prepping that you may not have had them for a long period of time within the off season to do this testing, you can either have that back information that they may have provided you, or err a little bit on the lower side and make up the milligram totals with DHT derivatives. But then that brings us to the overall total test dose, which even for a high risk model, in my opinion, is about double where I would ever take someone within a high risk setup.
I think it's just beyond, because he didn't list that any aromatase inhibitors or SERMs being used, which I would just assume they are. Yeah. There's no way that you're managing estrogen without an AI on 1,000 mgs a test. And that's why, Luke's saying 500 mgs, because usually without an AI, most people beyond that limit are going to need some type of aromatase control. So that's a stop point. Then we make up the rest of the anabolic load with DHT derivatives, or if you're on prep, trainer, there might be an oral in place. But that the idea of that you're switching to a propionate would, in this case, is kind of the necessary, because there's so much testosterone present that you're going to have to taper it down, because for one, aldosterone's probably out of control. So you are going to have more water retention in that. And then, so you'll have to somehow quickly reduce testosterone at the end. You could have tapered down a testosterone, an anthate or cypionate, but either way, it's just messy. It's a messy cycle designed to manage fluids and also have a mask on of what's true fat loss and what is just, water retention present. So yeah, the testosterone piece, it is more complicated than it needs to be, but then you're right. The total dosage is out of control. I don't know anyone that I coach. And I even have some really, really muscular individuals that have a requirement of 5 grams of gear to maintain muscle mass in a deficit. And just to remind everybody, like when we're talking about dosage needs from phase to phase, that at a maintenance calorie level, that's going to be your baseline needs. Like you'll have the easiest time maintaining muscle. So it's also going to be the lowest amount of PDs that it's going to meet that requirement. When you move into a deficit, that requirement is going to increase a little bit more, because you are going to challenge your muscle retention capacity. So the dosages need to go up. What will go even higher is in the off-season phase when you're trying to add on new level of muscle tissue. So that's when you're probably going to be reaching your peak dosages is in the off-season. People might argue that in prep. I could see at the tail end of prep reaching maybe close to your peak off-season dosages, but for the most part, start of prep, it's going to be just slightly elevated above what that maintenance level would be. So for someone to need 5 grams to maintain tissue, and we're saying this was, a men's physique competitor, and we don't know like if this individual that was like his peak like mass, like he could not get any bigger, and that was what it was taking. But I don't have anyone that would require that load.
I don't even have anyone in the off season that would require that load. Like, and that's the thing, right? Is like a lot of the problem here is the overall total deployment, which would kind of bring us to the Tren Ace, right? Like even in a high risk contest prep model, I don't see anything above 200 absolutely necessary. And it's asking the question of why are we using the Trenbolone, right? Like obviously for some people, or for pretty much everyone, there is a performance benefit of having Tren in alongside the glucocorticoid receptor and along these lines. But even like mediating what we need to mediate with Tren at 200 milligrams is going to be more than enough and would probably be on the higher end of what I'd be willing to run with someone in order to create the effect that we need from the Tren. Because like you said, like the needs for tissue retention within a contest prep are not overly that high. They're there, and the end is probably where the highest dose will be hit as we accumulate up across the prep. But to be using 1,000 milligrams of Tren Ace just sounds horrendous from a side effect management standpoint.
That's what I was going to say. Like you can imagine like the insomnia and the anxiety and just the overall feeling would be it would make the preps suboptimal just from that. Cause I've talked to other guys running like a gram of Tren. They're like, it was terrible. Like I felt horrendous all day long. And the aggression was bad, like controlling emotions. But I think the big thing is like on prep, we'd struggle with managing fatigue, and your sleep is a huge tool in that. And you're severely cutting that down by using that much Trenbolone, to where if we're using Tren for its muscle retention properties, but then you're not sleeping in turn, which is going to have probably even a greater impact, like for retaining tissue and losing body fat, that it's just completely at that point, you're reaching a far point of diminishing returns. And, with Tren, of course it probably does have some impact on uncoupling proteins and increasing the effects of like your fat loss agents that you're using. But even within that degree, going beyond like a 200 milligram, I just don't even see the rationale for it. And then, we see 1,000 milligrams of Masteron, 700 milligrams of Primo in place, which it's kind of somewhat redundant compounds. When you do look at how we break down Masteron, Primo, they're non-aromatizing DHTs. I mean, it's pretty nuanced. The differences, you might have, some people might say a little bit more strength out of Masteron, but you really can't, there's no evidence to say it. We don't have a head-to-head with Masteron and Primo looking at these effects. So it's purely anecdotal, but off of like how I've deployed them, I can't tell much difference. Like I've used Masteron as a primary growth agent all off season. And I've used Primo before too. I really, really can't differentiate between the two. So it's, whatever your flavor. But with that being said, like that would be the part of the cycle that I'm like, okay, this could be within reason if the other stuff wasn't there. Like if we have testosterone up to like, say the 500 milligram mark, Trenbolone is pulled back to this 200 mg mark. If you told me, hey, there's 1,700 mgs of like a Masteron Primo combo, I could say, okay.
Yeah, I agree. And that's kind of where like, I don't really have too much of an argument with the usage there, other than the poor guy pinning 1,000 milligrams of Mass P per week, because the PIP on that must be horrendous.
Men's Physique. So, I mean, you can go all glutes, I guess, but still, like, and quads. But
I think that brings us to the orals, though. So, like the VAR Winnie Halo combo, and like the necessity of that within a contest prep. I've kind of gotten to the point where my oral deployments are strictly performance related, just from like understanding how we may be using this within a stack design. It's going to be within the last 4 to 6 weeks for most people. And 9 times out of 10, I'm going VAR. And the reason being is because like we obviously have the burn patient data with Anavar about like the regeneration of tissue within burn patients. We know anecdotally that it's going to help with performance in a pre-session setting. And to me, it fits the bill the most of any of the oral compounds that we have available for choice at the end of a contest prep. And then we're just kind of adding redundancy, in my opinion, with the Winnie and the Halo.
I agree, because I've rotated through these like on an individual basis, like because I've done the cycle like for my pro debut coming out of USA's. I had like every oral in place: VAR, Winstrol, Halo, Provirone, and I don't know what was doing what at that point. Because eventually it's just everything's there, and you're like, well, this is what you use when you're on prep, and this is the look. And so it's like, well, you don't want to remove something because that's what was there. But once you just like say, screw it, I just have to see what this really can do with it less, then you realize that it is completely redundant, and you've reached the limit of what you're requiring to retain tissue. And you can only use so much to get hard. That's why I hate the hardeners, because we throw in all the hardeners like, oh, you just use Halo like 3 weeks out, and you need to just use Winstrol at X weeks out to get hard. It's like, how much of the hardener do you really need? And it just doesn't bring about anymore, because it really comes down to you just having to lose body fat. And there's not a magic of like, what is it, thin your skin? Like, no, that's bullshit. Like, it doesn't do that. And then they're not great fat loss agents either. They're reasonable, but if anything, we're offsetting androgen to estrogen ratio maybe a little bit. But beyond that, it's managing like aldosterone and just getting peeled. It's losing body fat. So you're just, if anything, you're creating a more toxic environment. And that the guy, when you just go on stage and you just have that inflamed, and you're going to probably drive more water retention from using so much compound.
Yep, I agree. And I think that when we look at like oral usage within the compounds that we're looking to drive fat loss, like the 80 micrograms of clen at the end of the prep, like no problem with that, right? Like if that's where we escalate up to for a need within clenbuterol usage, I probably would be running alongside it T3, where hopefully the clen wouldn't have to get up to 80 micrograms just to adjust for that thyroid adaptation across the prep. But like you said, it's like, what are we actually gaining with Anavar, Winnie, Halo? And to me, not really a whole lot.
Yeah, I didn't see in here either like growth hormone.
Yeah.
Maybe it just wasn't listed, but I mean, it's such an agent to help with synergy for your anabolic stack design, then also enhancing fat loss. So if the idea is like, hey, you want to get hard, to have something that can couple well with all the other compounds, probably reduce your overall steroid load. That would be something that to put in place. Again, you just have to make the consideration for the amount you use and how much water retention it could be bringing. But again, using like an ARB in place to help mitigate some of that would be a essential thing to have there.
Is there anything else you have to add to this before we move on?
Not really. I mean, I guess to touch on like what is the upper limit of dosing, because 5 grams isn't it. I would not be, if it's between 2,000 and 3,000 milligrams. I think that's the upper limit for what I would make consideration for, what I've seen like really large individuals even doing, and guys that are in the upper echelon of competitiveness too.
Yeah.
But I will say there's guys in that segment that do take way less too. And,
yeah. I don't think it's a guarantee that compound load is that high. I just think that there are people, in order to be competitive, that do run that upper limit at probably somewhere around that 25, 26 mark, kind of like right and smack dab in the middle, 25 to 27.
Yeah, let's do classic physique.
Yes.
Not the one that actually looked kind of decent.
Yeah, there was one that was like, this isn't too bad, but there is one that's kind of let me see, where can we find it?
Yeah, so this was test prop 100 mgs every other day.
Yeah.
Tren enanthate 250 mgs per week. Tren Ace 100 milligrams every day. Masteron P 100 mgs every day. 100 mgs of Winstrol daily. So to sum that up, you're looking at 350 mgs of test a week, almost a grand, 1,000 milligrams of Tren, 700 mgs of Mast, and then oral dose total 700 mgs per week. And I think that's the thing about, you need to look at your orals on a weekly basis. I think that I don't know why, I never even considered looking at them at that way. You just think of like, this is daily. You just take 10 milligrams. You don't think of it, how it adds up for your weekly total.
Yeah.
And you should be considering it like that. So when you say 700 mgs of, Winnie, it's like, oh, wow. Okay. That really does add a big increase. And I think that's the thing of when you do add oral in, you need to think consideration for what your total dose already at and how much do you need to go beyond. Like if you're on, say 500 mgs of total anabolic load and you're adding 50 mgs of Anavar a day, you're close to like doubling your amount. Like, do you need to double the load? Like, probably not. Like, hey, if you do 20 milligrams, it's another 140 mgs a week on top of your 500. Like, yeah. Okay, maybe that's a reasonable increase. Now, if you're someone that's on 2,000 milligrams, what does that percentage look like? Well, that might be a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's just these dosages are just thrown out. Like, you just take 50 mgs of Winstrol or 50 mgs of Anavar. Like, that's the standard starting point, and it shouldn't be the standard starting point for everyone.
Yep, I agree. The question that's going to get begged by the audience is like, what is the range then? Like, where is the start point, and then where is the high point, right? Like, where do you see deployment at being beneficial? And we probably should just use Anavar, right? Because we kind of walked the logic of why we would choose Anavar, but like the start point and the high point of that for most people.
Yeah, and so I know this was to touch on more like a high level advanced design, but I mean, regardless, like from a starting point, if you used, you almost wouldn't even use an oral in your first prep. You really didn't want to. Like, yeah. you could do just like testosterone and then even some Masteron if you need to increase the anabolic load and also for muscle retention. But if you're seeing that slight performance detriment, 10 milligram of Anavar, I think would be a very reasonable, because let's consider here. Let's say you had someone that was prepping, starting out 200 mgs of testosterone, maybe 100 to 200 mgs of Masteron. Say that's 300, 400 mgs. Not without reason. I know I'm not full of shit. My first show was 400 mgs of test, and I used some Winstrol at the end. So it can be done if someone can be willing to be patient. But then with that, okay, how much more do you need to go? Well, what's 10 mgs of Anavar a day? An extra 70 mgs. For someone that's brand new to this, like, they're going to get a benefit out of it, and that might be all that they need before you need to advance. But that's a reasonable percentage increase, right? You might argue 20 mgs. You're like, that's a female dose. It's like, well, when this stuff was deployed clinically, it wasn't differentiated between males and females, but it was around a 20 milligram dose. And that is enough. Like we're looking at burn patients for like nitrogen retention. That's what are you trying to do here on prep?
Yeah.
Just retain muscle tissue. So that could easily be, a starting point. So make consideration for that. Like if you have a beginner versus someone that's been doing this for 10 years, and, if they're taking 50 mgs of Anavar, should the beginner be taking 50 mgs of Anavar? Like, how does that make any sense? It shouldn't, right? Because when I say 10 milligrams, it makes me pause because it's like, well, that sounds really low, but for when you look at someone across years of training and doing this, it is more logical that way.
Yeah, I agree. 100% agree. And I think what you'll find is even in the high risk model, if the model is designed fairly well, you probably don't ever even need to go above 30 for a lot of people on the Anavar in the high risk model for the larger individuals. Like, yes, it's a really low percentage of the total stack design within a high risk model, but if it's deployed in a manner that's meant for performance maintenance or performance retention towards the end of prep, typically that 30 mgs is going to be enough to get the job done.
No, I agree. I mean, you could argue going a little more, but again, like really beyond that,
yeah,
you're not going to see like the extra benefit. There's not some extra benefit that is pulling out, but within the cycle design, I mean, actually the test is pretty reasonable here.
Yeah, I think the test is reasonable. I think again, it's just the ester conversation. Like, is it really necessary to use prop versus using an ethate or cypionate all the way through? The Tren is where I have the major issue with this.
Yeah, 1,000 milligrams of Tren. It's just, and that everyone's always like 1,000 mgs of Tren. It's like a joke, but people are put on this.
Yeah.
I have personally never gone that high. I did 600 mgs and it was just unsustainable, and I was starting to get in like my nipples were like lactating. It was like,
oh Lord,
like this estrogen prolactin mess. And it's like that. And that's when I like reduced Tren. That went away. And it literally had no like detriment by the reduction as far as like, oh, now I'm not losing body fat as much, or now I'm really losing muscle mass. Like it wasn't at all. The dosage was cut in half. Some Masteron though was put in place there, but regardless, 1,000 milligrams of Tren, it just doesn't even need to happen. And then you have 700 mgs of Masteron. So in this instance, I would shift that 800 milligrams of Tren just all into Masteron. So you run your 1,500 mgs of Masteron, 200 mgs of Tren, 350 mgs of test, and then I think the Winstrol is still like overdone. 100 mgs of Winstrol, just make the reduction. I'm sure, I almost would guarantee there's still like an AI present. We don't know, but likely there might have been.
Yeah.
But again, I like in that instance, I would still like make sure like to have growth hormone in place. Like some people like might not use clenbuterol, like if fat loss is moving well, but still clenbuterol has some muscle retention properties, but it's still a good fat loss agent as well, which, you can just leverage multiple pathways to get the effect to where you're not having used so much just androgen steroid alone.
And what I would add too is like two things here. One, there's no reasonable logic for using two different esters of Tren here either, like using a Tren and a Trenase. I prefer staying with Trenase from a control perspective, being able to titrate it up and down with a response a little bit faster. But let's just assume like an AI and a SERM was being used, because a lot of times you see with these stack designs, like dual usage AI SERM. And if we're doing that, not only are we running into the issue of crashing estrogen and not gaining the benefits of that, but we're also looking into interfering with growth hormone IGF-1 axis if there is growth hormone deployed here as well. So just because that's a commonality across a lot of these stack designs that may not be here, it is worth touching on just as like an add-on piece too.
Yeah, I mean, even for like in cattle, as like Tren's still using like cattle as a growth promoter, but they give estradiol with it because it doesn't have nearly the growth promoting effect unless it has estrogen. So not that we are cattle, but
it proves the point. Oh man.
Yeah. And then another thing is like Tren E, have come across that being counterfeit as well.
Yeah. Testy.
Yeah. It's testy, and they like kind of overcook it. It kind of gets this like red tinge to it. So that's usually why Tren Ace, I do like more of the moderate esters for, stable, but again, you also have to consider getting real compounds. So
I would agree 100%. I think that pretty much covers every aspect of this one.
Yeah, I think so.
Do you want to jump to open?
Yeah, let's do that.
This one's a good one. This one's a really good one. All right. So all daily dosing here. So 500 milligrams of Test-E per day, 216 milligrams of Primobolan per day, 100 milligrams of D-ball, 100 milligrams of Anadrol, 12 IUs of growth hormone. There was either Arimidex or Letrozole used, couldn't remember. And that was 16 weeks out.
I was first looking at this, I was like, this has to be off season, right? Like 100 mgs of D-ball. It's such a bad. It's just ridiculous.
Horrendous.
3.5 grams of test a week. Like that's already like beyond the load that we would even use total at a peak dose of all compounds.
Then you have 1,400, a little over 1,400, 1,500 Primobolan.
Yeah. And then, and then we add up the orals for weekly, 700 mgs of D-balls. Yeah, 1,400 mgs of just total oral dosing. Yeah, 3 grams. Yeah, well, that's 6 grams, right? Or is that a little more than 6 grams? Something like that.
Yeah, that takes the cake. I think this is the winner.
It does. And this was an open pro, and to say like this wasn't done. It was, which I will say, like, this coach has still coached some like top 10 Olympians. So it could have been done by someone, but this was given to, but this person, they saw this and like, this is just insane. Like, no way. And I can't even make sense of it. And I think with this one, with people that I know that might have actually done it, it's also people that usually don't come in shape.
Yep.
Makes sense. Holding like a ton of water. So sorry guys, we can't, like, I don't want to divulge like what, but
we're sitting on the edge of it right now.
Yeah, I know. Like, say it, just say it. I can't. I won't. I'll keep all this private. But anyway, yeah, it's just, and so for where this individual was for that many years ago, like he's advanced a lot since then, and has probably had one of the most productive growth seasons. And I would even say, like, with like 25% of this, and so that goes to say that this is like copy paste protocol of what this coach was doing back in the day, of just like, yeah, just off 16 weeks out, we just throw like 7 grams at you week 1. That's just, I just can't even fathom it. Like, what's the idea here? Try to grow into the show or something. But how many shows are you going to be able to do that to?
Barely make it to the first one.
Yeah.
All right. So Jesus Christ. We kind of gone over the issues with tests quite a few times. Like, obviously way too high. Bring that, even in the high risk model, bringing that down to an area where AI serum is not needed. Probably worth touching on the Letrozole, in case that was the one that was used. We touched on kind of like AIs with ADEX/Novodex, but thoughts, comments on Letrozole? usage, period.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's excessive. I mean, for one, we're using models where we don't need to use AIs.
Yeah.
But then even with Letrozole, I mean, you can really zero out someone's estrogen with really it. Quick. And that's not what we want. We absolutely want some estrogen present. So it just doesn't need to be there at all. Primobolan, it's Trenbolone, Tren Hex. It's just a different ester. People speak on Primobolan like it was something completely different than the Trenbolone acetate, which Trenbolone's Trenbolone. I mean, back then there was a stint where it was farm grade. Potentially they had just good quality.
Yep.
But it's still Tren. So we're saying 1,400 megs of Tren per week. Again, excessive. We touched on it. I think the one that's pretty unique here actually two that we haven't really addressed is the Dianabol and Anadrol.
Usage together. Yeah.
Which, I mean, talk about liver killer, but Dianabol, I just see it having zero place in bodybuilding.
I agree. I was going to say all season or contest prep. Like it doesn't matter. Like not having a place within the stack designed to influence it in a net positive.
Yeah, you're looking at a testosterone derivative that still aromatizes, but to a very strong form of estrogen that causes a ton of water retention. So off the start of a prep, you're going to have someone that's going to bring about a lot of water. I mean, you're like, oh, well, you're using an AI, and even with Dianabol, like it's still going to be impactful. What the other drugs you're using with aldosterone rise, you'll still be a balloon. So, with that being said, like right off the bat, that much Dianabol, it's fairly heavily liver toxic, combined with the Anadrol, which Anadrol has likely an impact on the estrogen receptor itself. As we know, it doesn't bind really strongly to the androgen receptor. So that is just a combination to be just a watery mess. And really makes the assessment for, are you losing body fat or not, off the front end of prep, hard to gauge.
Yeah. I was going to say it's a dual issue of assessment and health management, right? Because
it's reckless
body fluid, or net influence on like the estradiol/estrogen receptors. We're going to see such a large increase in blood pressure as well. That is going to be just absolutely impossible to control, especially at dosing like this, right? Like, and within a contest prep, like we typically should be seeing this blood pressure trend move down. So we wouldn't towards like a better level, or like hopefully staying in if you're doing a good job managing it in the off season, where, this is going to be just extremely detrimental and takes it out of the confines of high risk and almost, in my opinion, just idiocracy, just to be real.
Yeah, it's like, oh, hey, you're using some Dianabol and Anadrol. Like, can that serve as your estrogen? I don't know, that just sounds funny to say. Someone might say that. I don't know, but for one, Dianabol, it actually has some pretty strong action with the glucocorticoid receptor, and there was a neurotoxic study done with Dianabol comparing even to nandrolone and testosterone. It was by far the most neurotoxic compound to use. So when we're thinking, hey, you want amount of estrogen present to be protective for the brain and the heart, Dianabol, just that compound alone is extremely neurotoxic. So say like, oh, I'm going to take Dianabol to gain my estrogen to have these other benefits. You're having a lot of negative benefits. And so, and the type of estrogen that's being presented, it's not the same that you would get physiologically from testosterone. So it's not even a conversation to be had there. There's also the 12 IUs of GH.
Yep.
Which
think that's a little bit out of the confines of effective use of growth hormone as far as like the total dose. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I think once 6 IUs is kind of the limit, maybe 8, but really beyond 8, I just see more side effects crop up. And I was even consulting with someone not too recently running pretty close to that. And just got to a point where, like, pumps are gone. The insulin resistance is so present that everything's just getting like the fat gain that it was an off season, but the fat gain that was occurring like at a substantial rate. But for the purpose of contest prep, it's would really be defeating the purpose of what you would want with that much side effect being present. So yeah, I think that's probably double beyond what you want there.
Absolutely. And then again, just net influence on RAAS too, like just assessment, right? Like that's just another main issue on that much usage. So a lot wrong here. Like, Jesus, there's not even a DHT, like there's not even a Masteron and Primo in the stack design. So I would imagine that in order to just manage this, there was probably Letrozole in or high dosing of 8X, right? Like probably, and I've seen this come across my table and others, like 6-7 mgs a week, not totally uncommon with setup like this, probably.
Yeah, if you ran something like that, you absolutely blow up and you'd feel super round and full. And I think that effect would get masked of like, man, that was my best cycle. I was the biggest I've ever been, the strongest I've ever been. And don't get me wrong, you probably would be a bull in the gym, but it's just completely unsustainable because it's going to drop off. Like all that's going to drop off. You cannot hold that. And it's a ton of water, right? So that roundness and fullness, like it's just not going to stick around. And even like close to the show, it can mess with a lot of people's heads because you're going to have to pull that out or you're not going to be hard. You're with that much water retention present. And it's going to go, this is going beyond what you can even manage with like an ARB. So when you pull that out, like prepare to have like a huge drop in what you anticipate your stage weight to be, which a lot of guys, big guys, open guys have issue with because they want a certain body weight, or even super heavyweights, right? And be like, hey, you're going to have like 15 pounds of water that needs to come off. You're like, what? No, that's my stage weight. So then you keep it in place and then you're just not in shape. And how many super heavyweights have we seen that just aren't in shape? Or think about some really big round open guys that aren't like peeled out hard.
Yep.
Think about years where you see those same guys come back, they're down 10, 15 pounds and they're actually in shape now. Yeah. There's probably better stack design.
Yep, absolutely. And the crazy thing is like the whole reason that we're doing this is just the education around making better decisions within your stack designs for not only the health considerations that we're mentioning, but the outcome results too. Like I think this is such a large portion that, when we talk about the models that we're running is not overly discussed a whole lot. Like we talk about it this way because the outcome on stage is a look that if they get peeled out shredded and the prep is ran well, it is leagues above anything else when we talk about like using the stack design to help with modifying the look. And this is kind of where, this is like a prophylactic resistant stack design, but using all of these different pathways in order to mediate the outcome that we want is for not only the health considerations that we talk about, but it's for the outcome. It's for the look on stage. It is going to be granite hard and be able to be presented fairly predictably with the peaking protocols that we're using and the peaking models that we're using that allows people to, at 1 week out, they look like they could go walk out on stage, right? And that's where, when we talk about this, like, we make a lot of comments about the issues from a health perspective, but it's also from a presentation perspective of being able to nail it on stage as well.
Yeah, Mike, I second that. I mean, just accurately assessing along the way of prep, using what you need to retain tissue, push it up higher in the off season when you actually need to grow and not trying to like grow into your show. And again, it doesn't have the long haul in mind. When you have someone that's early 20s, just starting out here, you're like, hey, you might be doing this to your 35. Like that's a long time. I could see a little bit more of accelerated if you're getting into this later and you haven't had that exposure yet. Like you're getting into this, you're 30 and you know, like, hey, I'm only going to be doing this to mid 30s. Like, hey, this is only going to be 7-8 years. We might have a little bit more of an accelerated model, but for someone that's coming into this early 20s, yeah, you have a long time ahead to really pull out a lot from just experience, training, nutrition before you're having to pull every single lever for getting these maximum dosages that need to be utilized. I think if you use these off the bat, you're going to be in a point where they masked nutrition and training experiences that you should have been learning along the way to get the most out of those variables to where you have a real physique that would stand when you are making changes and pulling back PEDs during holding phases. And it's not just everything's dropping off because you didn't learn to train and actually diet. That's why I almost think everyone should have to do a natural show first. So you actually know what that experience is like, and you can't mask it with PEDs.
Yep. 100%. I did it 4 times.
You went longer than most.
Yeah. Oh, man. I think that's a pretty good kind of overview. I think a lot of this we dive really deep to, not only within like the J3U course, but in the forums as well with answering people's questions. And like we said, like it's not only a health outcomes consideration, like you said, if we're doing it for 25 to 35, but how are we bringing people into the stage, right?
Yeah.
And it's a large factor in making that predictable.
You want to look at the last?
Oh, I forget we have.
Yeah. I think this is a good one because this will end with, it's a classic Physique Pro. And I realized Luke, he was saying that he said no AI needed at the moment. So this is actually what he's currently doing.
Yeah.
And again, classic Physique Pro. We won't divulge like where he's at and what level, but regardless, it's not an easy task to become a classic Physique Pro now. It's an extremely popular division. And I think this stack design, it's neither one of Luke and I's clients. I think he must follow something along us because it's within reason, and this might give you an idea of something that's upper level and reasonably designed. So
yeah, I agree. 100%.
You want to read it out? Or you want me to?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Per week, we have 500 milligrams of testosterone, 400 milligrams of Mast E, 900 milligrams of Primo E, 50 mgs of Anadrol on training days, 3 IUs AM, PM of growth, so 6 IUs total, 500 milligrams of Metformin AM, PM, and as mentioned before, no AI currently needed.
Yeah, so I mean, the design fits pretty close to what we need. As far as like testosterone is concerned, we have it pretty close to what would be manageable. And without an AI, you mentioned it earlier, like 500 milligram. So, and then making up the rest of the anabolic load with DHT. So around, we have 1300 milligram. There's no Trenbolone in place. So obviously for within his contest prep needs, he doesn't need to go there just yet. Right.
Yep.
The Anadrol is one that's on the edge for me.
I agree.
I could understand like rationale there is like, hey, I'm going to take this as probably a performance benefit. And maybe the idea is like, I'm going to hold fullness taking this. I mean, what is Anadrol bringing? Yeah, it could bring some maybe a little bit more water retention. Potentially that's going to be happen.
Yeah.
Probably, partitioning some glycogen loading with what we know about if it does act more so on the estrogen receptor, it does have an impact on glycogen. But again, it's like if we want to, is that bringing anything to us for muscle retention to what we need out of training from a bodybuilding perspective?
Probably not.
Probably not. I think if you do, for what I consider Anadrol might be the last few days, if you're peeled to the bone to bring the fullness, but you just have to be aware there might be a little bit of water retention that comes with it. But that could be the trade-off. But to do something like that all prep long, it's going to present more stress to like liver, your lipids that I think we don't need present. And I don't think it's adding probably a lot to benefit there.
The comment I was going to make on the Anadrol was the fact that Trenbolone is not in means that the Anadrol usage is probably longer term and would be the main issue that I would have with it.
Oh yeah, that's a great point. It's usually a tail end of prep. You're seeing Tren in place, so this is probably before that's present. So
yeah,
and then so like I would just pull the Anadrol.
That'd be the only modification for me, really. Maybe add sartan, or depending on blood pressure, and just at least 20 milligrams for the modulation. But other than that,
I use a growth AM PM. Like that's within reason. 500 mgs of metformin AM and PM. I usually, there's instances where I go to 1,000 milligrams, but just for what we need to bring the health benefits of metformin, 500 milligrams is enough. And for being in a contest prep, like you're going to have someone that's getting insulin sensitive anyway. So I don't think we need that 1,000 milligrams. So you kind of wonder at that point about, how much GI distress might be occurring, and just more isn't always better. So with that, but overall, I think it's pretty reasonable.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's probably the closest one to landing the plane that we saw. I think, very minimal breakdown there, but I think this was really good. I think this is just to kind of start to put information out there on, if you are suggested this, or you come across this, like, you might want to raise your red flag and wave it, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a better way to do it, not only from a health perspective, but from an outcome perspective too. That is the whole reason why we're here talking about this. So,
yeah. And, don't take this as thinking of like, okay, John and Luke gave us like the upper limit, 2 to 3 grams. All right. I'm good to go for 2 to 3 grams. It's like, this is when you're getting close to that ceiling point. And so this is probably like 5 years in.
Yeah.
Within,
at minimum,
you have a few natural years, you have some levels like where you're just getting into testosterone and some DHT baselines, and then you're escalating up. And that's probably at that 5-year mark. You're probably touching into these dosages if you need that. And that should be like once you're reaching probably closer to a high level potential. And then from that point on, you can still keep using dosages around this, but it's going to be creeping progress. And you have a timeline that's going to be shortening for how long you can do it for. So if you get to that 5-year part and you're still like second call out nationals, that would be my decision to really think on what you're doing here. Because if you love it, so be it, but you're running real high risk towards health detriments that are not going to be, if they occur, just they're accumulating, they're occurring. You have to really weigh out those risks and make that call. Now, if you're someone that, hey, this has led you to be a pro, you're top 5 winning close to pro shows, you might be being able to go to the Olympia. I could make the understandable point of that you're going to be accepting that risk and doing this for a longer duration potentially because of what it is. But for a lot of guys, they're using this and more and not at that level. And that's when I would say you should probably be making the choice to pursue other things, put your time on other things that are going to be more productive in your life. And this is such a huge time commitment. And to put that much into bodybuilding and have that much health detriment and have it take you away from something that could be building your life in other ways, it's unfortunate, So
I agree. 100% on board with those statements. So I think that's it. Yeah, that was a really good episode. I really think that kind of lays out, call it myth busting, call it whatever you want, but at least some sort of logical, like, hey, like this is wrong, or this is not good, or this is why we wouldn't do this, to at least start to push people in the direction of like, hey, surprisingly, we did not see EQ on any of these.
That is true.
But stay away, like obviously like not clinically approved, a couple other things. So from a health considerations that we wouldn't see just because the detriment it brings and the benefit that it brings to the table, we can modulate via other ways. So just would say no in general, and
just say no.
Wrap it up in a bow, kind of like when you're in school and they do like the little red ribbons for like just say no to drugs. Oh man, I think that wraps it up. Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody, if you're watching on YouTube, if you have comments, questions, leave them below and Luke and I can address those for you. If you want to learn deeper on PDs, I've updated a lot of the PD module to have a great flow to it and go over periodization of PDs to this higher level. So cover that really in depth. But anyway, everybody, appreciate you tuning in, and we will talk to you next time.